الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And good morning, Instagram fam, friends and followers of as-Saafiy, and welcome to another episode of Revert Reflections. And we have been talking about the issue of abortion and abortion rights and the Islamic perspective on all of that. And yesterday we talked about at what point does life begin. And as a consequence, abortion would be illegal from the Islamic perspective. And today we wanted to talk about some of the justifications that are commonly offered for abortion and why every woman should have the right to an abortion, regardless of whether or not the fetus in the womb has reached a point where it is considered to be a living human being. And its aborting would be considered then an act of murder or killing or taking the life of that fetus. So one of the justifications, or two of the common justifications, for example, would be said, what if it is deemed that continuing the pregnancy could potentially result in the mother's death? Or it is feared that the child will be deformed or suffer from a condition that will severely impact the child's quality of life, or the quality of life of its parents, or the quality of life of all concerned. Under these circumstances, they would assert, shouldn't the mother be allowed to terminate her pregnancy, killing her child to spare her own life, or spare herself the misery of giving birth to a child with an abnormality? So these are two of the most common justifications for abortion. So from the Islamic perspective, we would respond and we would say, if we consider and attempt to answer these questions from a purely emotional or a purely secular logic perspective, our answer might be a resounding yes. Of course. Of course, a woman should be able to take the life of her own child. It's her body. She should be able to take the life of her own child to spare her own life. Or she should be able to take the life of her child if that giving birth to that child will cause her to be miserable, or the child to be miserable, or both of them to be miserable. That would be the knee-jerk reaction, the natural emotional response, and even the response of many people who are secular in their thinking. But what we have to do, brothers and sisters, we have to constantly remind ourselves that we're Muslims. And we are not allowed to offer an answer to any question which contradicts the answer previously provided by Allah, by His Messenger, and by the Islamic law. Because we're Muslims, we are by definition people who submit to Allah, submit to His Messenger, and submit to the Islamic law. And so we're not permitted, if we say we're truly Muslims, we're not permitted to oppose, to contradict, and to disregard Allah, to disregard His Messenger, and disregard the Islamic law. That would be a contradiction in terms. We're Muslims, we're submitters, but we don't submit. That would be a contradiction in terms. So, what does Islam say about what we're talking about? About a woman fearing that carrying her child to term could lead to her own death, and so she kills the child to spare her own life. What does Islam say about killing a child because you fear that it will be born with some type of abnormality? Let's start with the first one. In essence, brothers and sisters, if a woman believes that carrying a child to term could possibly result in her death, and therefore opts to terminate the pregnancy, in essence, what is she doing? She, in essence, is taking a life to spare her own. What does our religion say about one person killing another to spare his own life? Two people are walking, two Muslims are walking, somebody gets to jump on them, pulls out a gun, and says, I'm going to kill you unless you kill him. Are we allowed to do that? Would I be allowed to take the life of my friend, my companion, to spare my own life? The scholars of Islam, our religion prohibits this, and the scholars of Islam are unanimously agreed that it is impermissible for one person to take the life of another person, intentionally take the life of another person to spare his own life. This is something which is illegal in our religion and considered an act of murder and a heinous crime by agreement of the scholars, regardless of their school of thought. Also, if we say, okay, well, the mother could die. She could die. The truth of the matter is that we do not know what will happen. And we should not try, we should never try to preempt, to circumvent, or to frustrate the qadr of Allah, Allah's divine decree, and earn his anger and potentially his punishment in the process. We shouldn't try to snatch the wheel from God and basically say, I don't like where my life is headed. I don't like what it looks like you've decreed for me. And I'm going to what? I'm going to write my own story. I'm going to edit this chapter. We don't do that in Islam. We accept Allah's decree. We embrace Allah's decree because, as we always say, رَضِيتُ بِاللَّهِ رَبًّا. I am pleased with Allah as my Lord, meaning I am pleased with him as the one who charts the course of my life. If the child is aborted, we would be guilty of what? Guilty of murder. And the child's blood would be on our hands and his death would be our sin. Right? And so we're not only snatching the wheel from God, so to speak, metaphorically, but we're also earning his anger and punishment in the process. We're doing something which he prohibited us from doing and earning his anger in the process. The blood is on our hands. The sin is ours. But if the child is taken to term and it dies, or the mother dies, or both of them die, we're not guilty of any sin. We haven't committed any crime. These deaths were the act of Allah, Jalla Jalaluhu wa Aduma Sultanu. And we, instead of being punished or threatened with Allah's punishment, we will be rewarded for our obedience to Allah and our patience. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do. And sometimes he puts us in these situations to test us, to see, are we going to obey him and submit because we call ourselves Muslims? Or are we going to disobey him and do what our desires tell us to do what the flesh tells us to do, instead of submitting to Allah as we claim we are doing? Also, another consideration as it relates to the whole abnormality justification. Consider that if the child is aborted because it might be deformed or born with an abnormality or some condition which will adversely affect his or her quality of life, and that of those who will be forced to care for the child. If we abort the child for this reason, then we will be aborting the child out of fear of what might happen. We're not certain what will happen, but what might happen. And this, brothers and sisters, is no different from what the pagan Arabs used to do when they used to bury their children alive, kill their children at birth or shortly after birth. They would bury them alive because they feared shame, they feared poverty, they feared other possible things that might happen in the future. They would take the lives of their babies, their newly born babies, or at the time of birth or shortly after birth, because they feared what might happen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condemned them for this in the Quran. And he prohibited the believers from imitating the practice of the pagans, doing the thing that the pagans used to do, taking the life of their children because they feared what might happen. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ خَشْيَةَ إِمْلَاقٍ. And do not kill your children out of fear of poverty, out of fear of what might happen. Lastly, we must never forget, brothers and sisters, that our religion, unlike other faiths and unlike secularism, our religion teaches us to give precedence to the purpose of life. Underscore that. Give precedence to the purpose of life, which is to worship Allah and be devoted to him. Give precedence to the purpose of life over the quality of life. Doing what pleases us and makes us comfortable and happy. That's quality of life. Allah says, the Messenger says, our Deen says, always give purpose of life precedence over what makes you feel comfortable, what makes you feel happy, what you want to do, what your flesh wants to do. Through abortion, brothers and sisters, some people, they may achieve quality of life, or what they define as quality of life. But if it is achieved at the expense of our purpose, at the expense of our religion, at the expense of our relationship with Allah, if we are truly Muslims, is it worth it? Is it worth it? If we are truly Muslims, the answer should be obvious. And with that, brothers and sisters, we bring today's session to a close. Inshallah ta'ala, we have one more session where we want to just talk about a few more points related to this issue. And until then, until we meet again tomorrow, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, as always, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless your houses, to bless your spouses, to bless your children, to bless your sources of livelihood and income, to bless the rest of your day, to bless you and make you blessed wherever you may be, to shower you with His blessings and to surround you with His protection. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.